Okay, so in the previous example, I demonstrated how to do a quick little 5-minute CRUD app. And we did that by enabling search, edit, and delete on the front end forms, which gives some access to users. And if we don't want them performing nefarious sorts of transactions with our database, reading and writing to the database by editing code on the front end, then what we need to do is readjust some of this code and make a proper app which performs all the database queries and interactions with the database on the server. So what happened in the previous app, we've got on form 1 a bunch of interactions directly in the front end code with the PEEPs database data table. So what we're going to do is put all these search and database interactions into a server code module. So here's the first one. The app opens up in the init method. We've got the repeating panel 1 items property being set to the values which are returned by this database query. So what we're going to do, I've got another copy of this app, and what I've done is moved all the functions already over. So you can see here what I've done is instead of actually running the code on the form 1, I've instead made a call to an Anvil server function called get all rows. And I've made this data table already only editable and viewable by server code. So I've changed the that little permission property. So our first function here is called get all rows, and you'll see that this is the exact same function that in the original app I was running in the form. So we've got this search going, and we're just returning the results of that search back to the front end where it was called. So it's the exact same function, just copied it over, and now the items of the repeating panel are being set to the results of that function call. So next, in our original form, we have this database table operation being performed, the add row method, and that's being performed right here on the front end. We want to get it out of the front end so it's secure. And so instead, right there, we're going to make an Anvil server call to a function on the server called add row. And you'll see that in the server, the add row function is the exact same code that we had over here in the front end. Okay, so there's no argument sent to that because we're not returning any data from this. We're not sending any data. All we're doing is having this function add a row to the database, blank row of data, all nuns in each column. Okay, so that's been moved to the server, pretty easy to do. The same sort of thing happens in the item template 1, which is the template for the repeating panel. So every row of the repeating panel has this layout. And when we started this app in the init, it's this repeating panel that we've set the items property to. Basically, each of the rows in the repeating panel displays one row of the database, values one row from the database. And the really nice thing about this was we can refer to each row of the database as self.item. That refers to the database row, the values in the database row that are assigned to that row of the repeating panel. So in our original app, when we when the user clicks the little icon for delete, what's happening, this little icon now runs this function. And so self.item refers to the database row. If we call the delete method on that, it deletes that row from the database. And then we run another method to remove the display, that row display from the repeating panel. So it deletes the data from the database and then deletes the row from the display. Again, this is the original app that is run directly in form code. So that form could potentially give nefarious users access to the database. So what we're going to do is instead take that item delete, send it to the server. So again, here we've got, after the user confirms that they want to delete it, we're going to make an Anvil server call of a function which I labeled del_row, delete row, and we passed the argument self item, which again is the database row, the values in the database row, which are being displayed on on the widgets of that repeating panel. So self.item refers to that row of the database. So we're passing that as an argument to server module 1, and you can see it's taking there's one parameter there, which we've passed, which again was self.item. And here we're assigning that the variable itm for item. And again, for that row, we're just calling the delete method, and that deletes the row from the database. Only now it's just happening in the server. And notice that all of these server functions are decorated with the anvil.server.callable decoration so that they're callable at front end. So again, the item, self.item property is passed. That is the database row is passed to this function, and then a reference to that row is passed directly in this function, and we run the delete method upon that database row. So now that has been moved over to the server. If we go back to form 1, there's one other thing that happened here. In the original, what we did was we passed a number of sort and search parameters. So when we looked at this design, you could see we had several drop downs, which contain the names of all the columns in the database. So those are all the columns that were in the database, and a text box that allowed the user to type in some filtering characters, so we could only display the characters that fields that contain these characters. So what we did here was we ran all of this code, and again, we assigned the items property of the repeating panel to be the results of this database query. And in the front end, again, this is the original app here. In the front end, all of this code is running. And so on the front end, all you have to do is directly refer to the values that are in the form. So the selected value in dropdown 1, the selected value in dropdown 2, the value selected in dropdowns 2 and 3, and also the text value in text box 1. Pass all that directly to the function that's running on the front end. So on the server, what we're going to need to do is take those values, and again, instead of running it here, we're going to do an Anvil server call to a function on the server, which we're calling search, and we're going to pass all of those values, the selected values and the text from text box 1 to the server function. So what we're passing here is a drop-down value, another drop-down value, so 4 drop-down values, and a piece of text that's in text box 1, a string that's being displayed in text box 1. And so if we look at that, what we call the search function, it's down here. You can see there are 5 arguments, and the variables here are just labels that we're giving to each of those arguments. The first drop-down we're calling sort 1. The second drop-down was a true/false value, so I call it TF. A couple more drop-down values called it sort 2 and 3, and then a text value that was in the text box, which we're labeling search text. And then we just run the exact same search. So that's what we were doing here in the front end, and passing, instead of the properties of each of the drop downs and text fields in the form, we're passing those values which have been sent as arguments to the function. Because we are now running on the server, we can't get direct access to, we can, but it's easier just to pass these as arguments to the function. So it's the exact same function that was running on the front end before, just replacing these drop down and selected values and text values from the drop downs and the text boxes with variables, arguments that have been sent to the function. This little function down here, this search query, is basically we're looking for anything in the name column that this ILIK does a case insensitive search for the text that was typed into the text box, which we pass to this function. And this is a wildcard that refers to anything before the text or anything after the text. That anything can be nothing also. So any text in the name field that contains the search text is going to be returned by this function. The tables are going to be sorted in order according to those columns. Okay, so we have one other thing that happened here, and this is the most complex thing. One of the nicest things about using the front end features to access the database is when we work with the design of the repeating panel layout, what happens is we get to select the write back option. Now, since this form, this is the original app, since this form has access to the data table, when we were down on the data table in this app, we gave permission to the front end to read, edit, and write, search, edit, and delete directly to the data table. And so the whole reason we're doing this is to secure that a bit by putting these functions in the server. Now, what happens here with the repeating panel ability to bind to a database table, the automatic default is that we can write back to the database. So if a user types into this text box something other than what was there, changes the value in that text box, it's going to get written back to the database in that row of the database, and you actually make a change to the database. Again, the address, same thing. If a user types in any of these fields or selects another date from the date picker, the value that's selected is going to get written back to the database. But once we go over to the new app and make these adjustments, the data tables here do not have search, edit, or delete access. They don't have edit access. So when we make that change, we can no longer use the write back feature. And everything else now we're calling from server functions. They don't even have search access. So we've moved all these functions to the server. We need to do the same thing with this write back feature. So instead of just enabling write back, we actually need to disable that, because if the user tries to type in there and write back is selected, what's going to happen is we're going to get an error when we try and write to the database, because that's no longer allowed. So all of these fields have been set. The write back feature has been set so that there is no write back access. So instead, what I did here was I added another little icon to each row. We already had the delete icon, the trash icon. So I added this little save icon, a little floppy icon, floppy disk icon. And when that's clicked, what we're going to do, because we need now to write a function that will allow us to edit and update each of the columns in that database row. So what we're going to do is call an Anvil server function, and that Anvil server function is named edit row, and we're going to pass it, first of all, self.item, which is, again, the row of the database that's being displayed on the repeating panel. And then we're going to pass it each of the values that are displayed. So if the user has edited the text in any of the text boxes or text areas or changed the date, each of those values now, the updated values, whatever exists in each of those widgets, is going to be passed to this edit row function. So again, we're calling the edit row function, sending the actual row of the database to that function. a reference to that row of the database, and then all of the values that are um, that are displayed in the user interface. And so if we look at this edit row function again, it is decorated with Anvil server callable decoration. Here is the definition of the function. It's got each of these arguments set to it. So again, I use the variable ITM for item, which refers to the reference to the database row that's been passed along to the function. And then I gave the labels name, address, kids, notes, and birthday to each of those text and date values that were passed from the user interface widgets. And then in this function, all we do is call the update method on that row, on that database row, which again is referred to here by the argument ITM item. That refers to self.item, which was passed from the user interface. And we run the update, we execute the update method on that database row, and all we do is set the name column to the name variable that's been sent, the address column to the address variable that's been sent, the kids column to the kids variable, notes to notes, birthday to birthday, so that that row is now updated with the values that were in the user interface widgets. And that's it. With that, we have converted every function that was formerly just running in the user interface in the front end form, which is insecure and allows users to get access to the database. Now all those functions are running on the server, so users have no access to those functions, can't change them, like they can change the functions that are running in their browser. And now we have a secure database, and this runs exactly the same way with all the exact same functionality. All we have to do is move those server functions over so you can see, just run it a little bit here. We can click on the new button. Again, I'm running on a very slow netbook here. This is not Anvil. It's just a very slow netbook. So I can create a new field and it will refresh and display. I can delete a row. I can search. So let's say I want to just search for things that have, for names that have ASDF, and it redisplays. And now we have only names that contain ASDF. If I want to sort that so that everything is sorted, let's go back to just showing everything in the database, sort it by the name column, and then any names that are the same will sort by address column. So you'll see here as I get these sort of results, everything is in alphabetical order by name, and then any of the names that are the same, so here ASDF, they are now in alphabetical order, alphanumeric order, according to the address field. So the sort is working. And if I want to edit something, let's go ahead and add a new field and we'll edit. The only difference with this one, let's delete this again. I click that twice. The only difference here is that we have to click on the little save icon because there is no write back, where in our nice little front end code, we didn't have to do anything to save those values when they were changed, were automatically written back to the database. So just put some data in here, just some random data, and pick a date and click save. And you'll see in the function I had to send an alert, and then it refreshes the page. And now we've got a save to the database. So every bit of functionality that we have with our simple 5-minute CRUD app, add another 5-10 minutes here, and you've got a real legit CRUD app that does all of the normal CRUD functionality with search and sort. And everything now has been moved to this server so that this is a much more secure app. You can use this for production. This is a nice template for doing any sort of basic CRUD functionality. If you combine this with the data grid display, with the left scrolling, you can create interfaces that can paginate, and you can have lots and lots of values, and work nicely on mobile to fit a huge number of columns all on a screen that is very small. So hopefully this gives you a good basis for creating the most common sorts of apps that just let you deal with tables of data and search and sort and find and um, interact with saving, with creating, reading, updating, and deleting items in a database.